You can start off. You're going live.
All right. Thank you, David.
Here you go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the Until Inside Science Fiction Book Club. Our first session was a reading and discussion of The Wall by Gautam Bhatia. And as Zainab, the CEO of Has Geek, had mentioned during the beginning of that session, this year Until Inside has started exploring science fiction in earnest. So today we are bringing to you a discussion of Bengali science fiction from the past to the present. A couple of things I'd like everyone to keep in mind before we begin. Please keep your mics on mute. There will be a question and answer session at the end of this. So keep typing in your questions into the chat box and we'll take them later. I'll tell you, unmute yourselves and you can ask the question yourself if you want. To introduce myself, I am Vijay Lakshmi. I am the author of Strangely Familiar Tales. My poetry has been published in a few journals and my short stories are a part of a few anthologies published by Women's Web. I also write for Women's Web about pop culture and feminism. My co-moderator for the day is the brilliant T.G. Shenoy. T.G. Shenoy is an SFF enthusiast, columnist, and critic. He's the writer of India's longest running weekly SF column, New Worlds Weekly, for Factor Daily, and the SpecFix column for Bangalore Mirror. He curates the SF track for the Bangalore Lit Fest. He has featured in podcasts such as the Tale Harate Kannada podcast and events such as the Sri Lanka Comic Con to talk about SFF in general and Indian SF in particular. He hosts To Boldly Go, a fun SFF quiz every Saturday. He is also an advertising and marketing professional and is currently a consulting partner with Celsius 100 Consulting. Our wonderful panelists today are Ghosh and Debraj Moulick. Ghosh is a computer science researcher by profession and the founder and editor of Bengali SF magazine Kalpabiswa. He is also the founder of Kalpabiswa Publications, which publishes SF and fantasy books in Bengali. Ghosh has edited and translated several anthologies of Kalpabigyan in Bengali. His articles on Kalpabigyan have appeared in Matty Brown Monograph, Scroll, Pratidin, Ananda Bazar, and other periodicals. Debraj Moulick is a lecturer of English in KJ Somaiya Polytechnic College, Mumbai. He has submitted his MPhil thesis based on post-colonial Indian science fiction studies at the Department of English, University of Mumbai. He has presented multiple research papers based on science fiction literature in national and international conferences. Debraj has got a master's in English from Bharati Vidyapeeth University, Pune, and has graduated with honors in English from Ashutosh College, University of Calcutta. His areas of interest include science fiction, post-colonial Indian science fiction, post-colonial studies, mythology, language studies, and marginalized literature. He's a full-time bibliophile and movie buff. He's a bilingual poet, composing and reciting poems in English and Hindi. His poems, short stories, and memoirs are parts of various anthologies and magazines. You can catch his poetry recitals on YouTube. He's also an active blogger and reviews books and films on his blog, debrajtipedia.wordpress.com. He is an official book reviewer of science fiction work like Time Crawlers, Dev, Mahabharata Code, among others. His science fiction short story will be published in Covid Katha, an esteemed publication of NCSTC. Welcome, everyone. Shenoy, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, sure. My pleasure and honor to do so. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this discussion on Bengali SF. If you ask me, 1 hour is too less, but we'll try to, do justice to the subject and to your time. And the reason we chose Bengali SF to go with is the history of Indian SF. So you can say begins with SF in Bengali or by Bengali authors. And for the purposes of this discussion, and given that it's a vast topic, till about 1947, when we say Bengali SF, we mean United Bengal. And then, past that, when we say Bengali SF, we will limit ourselves to SF from West Bengal and not Bangladesh, because that is another subject of discussion for another hour altogether, for another day. Now, to start with, I'm in fact, one of the reasons that I wish I was a Bengali because every Bengali seems to have been fed on a steady diet of science fiction from their childhood, and it's living up to its reputation of having the most robust tradition and legacy of science fiction, starting from, I think, from as early as 1835, when Kailash Chandra Dutt wrote a journal of 48 hours in the year 1945. So it was a sort of time travel thing, where he portrayed India 110 years from now. I mean, of course, we must look at this in the background of the colonial tensions that are going on. And then 10 years later, his cousin, Shashi Chandra Dutt, wrote The Republic of Orissa, a page from the annals of the 20th century. Again, a time travel thing, but these were both in English. Then, of course, the other landmark story that was there is Himlal Dutt's Rahasya, which means mystery. And it was this wondrous tale of these automatons and new machines and all that, which was, sort of wondrous for that age. But you ask the historians of Bengali SF, they wouldn't, consider strict science fiction. For that, until now, the first story was, Niruddesher Kahini. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The story of the missing one by Jagdish Chandra Bose. Thanks, Debraj. I'm trying to do my best. By Jagdish Chandra Bose. And till now, it has been considered the first true science fiction story of the modern era, not just in Bengali SF, but also in Indian SF. It's a wonderful story about how Bose uses a bottle of hair oil to, thwart a cyclone. And it's also a landmark in world SF or in literature that it was the first time perhaps that the butterfly effect, or what you call initial, dependence on initial conditions, was used in a story. So, it has more numbers that count. So for the longest time, that story was, considered the first. But then I think we, in the light of what the Kalpabiswa team and Deep have figured out, I think it's time to rewrite that bit of history. So Deep, can you just tell us a bit about this other story that has now been proven to have come before Niruddesher Kahini?
Yeah, it was a story by Jagadananda Bose. He was also one of the contemporary science writer of that time. He actually was very close to Rabindranath Tagore, and he used to teach in Shantiniketan. So Jagadananda Bose wrote a story. It's called Shukra Bhraman. So the story was actually available for a long time, because it was a part of one of his book, which is published in like 1920 or 22. I can't remember that time. But the thing is, since it was published much later, and in that book, actually, in preface, Jagadananda said that he has written it long back, but there was no proof that when he was written that story and where it was first published. He didn't mention any of this. So most of the researchers, they actually thought that it was actually not the first story, because in that story, he said that two friends, they thought they went to Shikra Grove and they found a civilization there. And that civilization, alien life, and their society and everything, it was so vibrant and so logical that people actually thought that it was copied from War of the Worlds or those kind of alien invasion stories. And since that War of the Worlds and all those and some of those kind of stories are written after 1898, so people all assumed that it was, of course, written after 1898. So it was written in after 19th century. So the first story should be Niruddesher Kahini by Jagdish Bose, because Jagdish Bose written that story in a very specific magazine. It was also very like a funny story. There is a magazine. It's called Kuntolin. Kuntolin was actually a hair oil. At that time, in Bengal, there is a very famous hair product company, and their leading product was Kuntolin hair oil. So they thought about that, coming up with a magazine, and only they are going to make a competition on that. Some kind of, you have to write some kind of story where you have to promote that Kuntolin hair oil without saying much about like it's a promotion. You don't have to say it's a promotion, but you have to use that Kuntolin hair oil in some way. And Jagadish Bose wrote that story there, and that story was published in the first edition of that Kuntolin magazine, and it got the first prize also in the competition. Yeah. So it was like they have there is a that magazine was available, and we all know that this magazine is published in 1895. 1895 or 96, I can't remember, right? It's 1896 actually.
1896, yes.
Yeah, it's published in 1896. So we didn't have any idea that when Jagadananda Bose wrote that his story. So sometimes back we actually found in a magazine that there is an anecdote written that he wrote some stories, some science stories or science fiction stories in Bharati magazine. That Bharati magazine is also a very famous magazine in Bengali, but it is impossible to find out or track out all those copies of that magazine. But fortunately, in Heidelberg University, there is a section of old magazines, old Indian and Bengali magazines, and they actually give free access, and they just made PDF of all those magazines, very well preserved. So we went to that Heidelberg University archive and found it, all the magazines, and after sorting out, we found an original story, and that story, that Shukrabhaman, was actually published 1 year before Jagadish Chandra Bose's story. And if you actually read that story, it was, I know that maybe some of the you guys maybe who actually read Jagadish Bose's story, maybe you can object, but the Shukrabhaman is much superior than Bose's story, actually, because it has actually depicted a society, alien society. And there also, racism is also there. And there is a dark side of the planet and the light side of the planet, and in light side of the planet, all the societies and everybody, they are actually very, very alike to the European society. And the dark part is their society is very alike to like the African savage societies there. And he has given a lot of interesting scientific anecdote also, like how the societies, how they are making their house, how they are providing their foods and everything. Overall, the story is, in my opinion, this much close to a real science fiction than Palatak Tufan.
And now, since it's been proven that it was published a year before, so it takes on the mantle of being the first, I mean, according to the first modern SF story in, proper SF story in Bengal.
Right.
I mean, I was fortunate enough to read the translation of it, but in a do not share sort of basis. I do hope that, it's such a great story. I hope that the translation gets published somewhere and becomes
the translation is going to be published. I think it is by Bodhisattva, right? Bodhisattva translated it. Yeah.
Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay.
Yes. And after that, if you go chronologically, then we must say about Sultana's Dream, which is also a landmark. It was written in 1905, and so initially it was written in English, and it was also a spectacular thing because that time someone is writing feminist SF, and who belongs to a Muslim society, and she's writing it in English at that time. So it was also a very, very spectacular thing. Later, she actually translated it in Bengali also. I didn't know that. We found out that from Bangladesh, we can find out that writing in Bengali also.
Actually, there were two works by Begum Hussain, both Sultana's Dream and Padmarag. It was published in India's Ladies Magazine. So yeah,
Yes.
so two science fiction. And ironically, it also resembles, the DC Comics Wonder Woman, Amazonian land, where it is ruled by women. There is a gender role reversal. So that's a brilliant concept. Yeah, brilliant concept.
No, I mean, for 1905, it was quite revolutionary. The fact that all the men are in the zenana, right? And the women take all the decisions. And I love the descriptions. The work gets done much faster when it's women doing it, because apparently the men are just good at like having chai and taking smoke breaks and wasting time. So women get things done faster.
Yeah, all of that. And even in this society, the men are allowed to do everything except embroidery, because apparently they don't have the patience. Put a thread to a needle.
Yes, exactly. I love that role reversal, and even it's not just in the context of Indian SF, but if you look at Sultana's Dream in the context of world SF, it's probably one of the earliest pieces of feminist SF ever written. I mean, the Western histories, usually credit Charlotte Gilman's Herland, right? But 10 years before that, Begum Rokeya Hossain wrote. Sultana's Dream. Coincidentally,
and that too in English.
Charlotte Gilman's Utopian Land is called Herland, whereas Begum Rokeya's Utopian Land is called Ladyland.
Ladyland. So that's more British, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we need to sort of keep it in the context of what is going on and all. And I remember reading up about it, and she had written it to sort of surprise her husband who was out on a work tour, and he comes back and he reads the story and he remarks, "Most splendid revenge." I don't know what he was referring to, who was taking a vengeance on whom, but he's supposed to have read it and said, "A most splendid revenge."
And apart from this, though, I think Shukrabrahman has been given this particular title as first Bangla science fiction. And in the year 1898, Rabindranath Thakur, whom you call Rabindranath Tagore, he composed this play Tasher Desh, and in is Land of Cards, if you translate it. And in that particular play, it's a distant utopian land where the cards are ruling the entire country. Right. So you can see the traces of science fiction even in Ashare Goppo. So yes, so science fiction goes back, long back. Yeah. So it's a good thing. And the ironical thing is this Kuntalin thing, Jagadish Chandra Bose wrote this thing. It was a capitalistic strategy, marketing strategy. So Bengal came out of science fiction from capitalistic outsource or something like that. So that's a very good thing, I guess.
No, and
money also.
No, he won the prize, but then and there was a whole subtext, of the empire in it. And then when he rewrote the story in 1921,
that was
right, Palatak Tufan, right? Yeah. When he rewrote the same story, while it stayed true in the essentials, the science element had gone. The Scientific American, which was referred to in the original story, was gone. Yeah. Suddenly, you had this circus lion tamer, and you had this thing, and the whole subversive, anti-imperialist subtext was, missing when it was rewritten in 1921. So yeah, I mean, these are all great cultural figures, which is why I said, if you're a Bengali, you will end up being exposed to science fiction, and that, as children, we all love tall stories, which brings us to the other giant of Bengali SF, Premendra Mitra. Debraj, would you like to just...
Yeah, Premendra Mitra's... Yeah, tell me, you were saying something.
No, I was saying, over to you. Just you and Deep, please enlighten us.
So Premendra Mitra's Ghanada, because we have this particular term known as Gulbaj. Gulbaj means who boasts his own knowledge. He has been to this land, he has been to this space and all those things. And I guess Ghanada's name is Deuce or something like that. I've read it a long back.
Dos,
Ghanada's
Dos,
stories. Dos.
Ghanasham Das, that's his name.
Ghanasham Das.
And he used to say that he was called as a DOS by foreigners.
DOS.
Yeah.
And he's like, dude, give me this cigarette and I'm going to tell you a story, an incredible story. And he takes you back. He is himself a time machine. He takes you back to Second World War. He takes you back to the world of Mahabharata. If you look carefully, he's a fascinating figure. But in the end, you will like, fake raha hai, banda fake raha hai. So that's the fun behind it. You won't call it pure science fiction, and you won't call it a parody also. It's somewhere between science fiction, parody, and tall tales. It's a fascinating. And it's I guess it gives the glimpse of Bengali youth in that particular era.
Right.
That's a cultural icon. Yeah, it's a very important piece of literature from the culture.
It is a mess culture. Mess culture means some working people, they're sharing a house. And actually, Ghanadas used to live on the upstairs in the roof. There is only a single room. Ghanada used to live there, and sometimes he comes down and share his wonderful tales to other people. And all the other guys who lives in that same house, they try to find out any fault from his story. But every time Ghanada actually used to just say some kind of stuff, they couldn't find any logical loophole in his stories.
I mean, if we are going to accept dream narratives as science fiction as well, I mean, or as SF, then I guess it counts. It counts. I mean, I know, it's a compliment that Bengalis love to sort of analyze and overthink and, everything threadbare. I mean, for example, when I was, I'm not even going to attempt it because, but the three types, there's science.
Just how analytical Bengalis goes. Yesterday, we have a group about science fiction in Facebook. Somebody posted a 5-page article about one of the Ghanada stories. It was called Tall. That story was called. It was a story about a specific kind of water, which was supposed to be kind of have some chain polymer-like structure. And if it is put into common water, it's going to break that common water and make it from jol to tall. Jol means water in Bengali, but he invented the word tall. The tall means a specific kind of water which has those kind of destructive nature. And the story was about that one scientist make that kind of water, and he is going to change all the water of the world to that specific water. And the thing happened that somebody actually find out what is that tall. It was a polymerized water. And two scientists in Soviet, that time 1970s, they actually claimed that they invented that kind of water. No, that was not a heavy water. Somebody wrote about deuterium, but it was not deuterium. It was kind of a polymerized something, a different kind of water.
Heavy water?
No, it was not heavy
water.
Yeah, actually what happened that time, it was a very sensational news in 1970 that two of the Soviet Russian scientists, they came out with that structure of specific water. And after 1 or 2 years, it was found that some other, I guess that some French scientists, he found out that water actually doesn't exist. Those people actually made some mistake in their experiment, and it was not any kind of threat to world because that property doesn't exist really. But maybe what happened?
If only they had, presented that research paper as a science fiction story, may have worked better.
Actually, that's what Premendra Mitra did. Premendra Mitra wrote that original article by those Russian scientists, and he wrote that story. That's why he used all those special scientific anecdotes. So,
That's
but
that's the thing.
after 2 years, they found out that that was bogus. But he couldn't change the story anyway. So somebody wrote a five page article about it in our group, that Ghanada's fault, Ghanada's bull.
Oh, I mean, you must at the end of it, you must probably tell people are already asking what group this is. Seems fascinating enough. I mean, if the conversation happens in English, we can type or use Chrome with the translate extension. So.
Yeah, it's mostly in Bengali actually.
Yeah, so basically, this guy, Professor Shonku, so he invented this particular device known as, I guess, linguagraph or something, which could translate any language to the particular, from source language to particular language. That is it. That was the, I guess, ancient model of this particular thing known as Google Translate. Yeah, Google thing. So Satyajit Ray was ahead of time, and he could understand there is a big issue in India with this language thing. There's a big issue. So that's why Professor Shonku comes in, I guess so. But
Okay,
Canada is very close to heart.
Now we're getting to where Debraj's heart lies in talking about the rays.
Okay.
Right. So can
just before he went to Satyajit Ray, I just want to add that today is the birthday of Sukumar Rai.
The father
Yeah.
of
is it?
Satyajit Ray.
So yeah, we should also mention Sukumar Rai and his work Heshora Mushia's Diary, which is actually kind of a precursor of Professor Shonku.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very much. Very much.
Very much so. So a little bit about Sukumar Ray and Satyajit Ray and their influence before.
So basically, Sukumar Ray, so he was of course, he was the father of Satyajit Ray. He came up with nonsensical writings. I'm not saying it's a nonsensical, okay? Absurd literature. For example, Hojo Borolo, Abol Tabol. And there is particular magazine, Shanonda, in the year 1992, Satyajit Ray gave an interview in that particular magazine that his father, Sukumar Ray, was inspired by Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World.
The Professor Challenger series.
Yeah, Challenges, Lost World. And his Heshoram Hushiari is a bit of caricature. It's a parody of that particular Professor Challenger's work. Professor Challenger, yeah, of course, he's a big guy, 7 feet tall, and he cannot control his, rage. Atamaji Satakli, Ekdam Husa and all those stuff. And this Heshoram Hushiari, he goes out to adventure. He's an expert huntsman. He takes out gun and all those stuff. He goes to Karakoram and all those places. But there has been, I think, I don't remember the name of the particular stories. The Heshoram Hushiari's diaries came up, and Satyajit Ray, he took the cue from, of course, his father, Sukumar Ray, and Professor Challenger of Arthur Conan Doyle. He came up with Professor Shonku in the year 1961. And his first work, Bomojatri Diary, or the Diary of a Space Traveler, as published in Puffin's Classic, Penguin's Classic, and all those things. So he came up with this thing. He was supposed to be a parody, a caricature, but in the end, he became a serious protagonist with a little bit of humor and all those stuff. So that's Satyajit Ray's Professor Shonku. There has been 38 works, short stories, one big story, Sharnapurni, the story of Golden Lips. So that's the entry of, yes, Professor Shonku. And I guess, I won't say he's the best or something like that, but he's the most translated, most adapted in radio, in e-commerce toys, and also translated in English. So that's how Professor Shonku is. Yes, so that's it, Professor Shonku. And to description of Tal water. Okay. So there is an interesting comments going over here.
Yeah, we'll run through them at the end of this conversation.
And this, I guess, I and Deep will agree with this thing. The advent of magazines, science fiction magazines. So Sandesh was one of the magazines, science fiction magazine, which published Professor Shonku. There was Ramdhanu and Rong Moshal, the famous magazine, which published Premendra Mitra's works.
Right.
And then Ashtorjo by, Adrish Bardhan, who coined this particular term in 1962, Kalpabiswa.
Yeah,
There is-
again, I have to just interrupt. Kalpabigyan was coined by Adish Bardhan, but not in 1962. It was again a wrong notion. Yeah,
Okay.
we actually went through all the Ashcharyas magazines, and we found out that
Okay.
it was actually in 1974 in Fantastic. He
Okay.
first used that word.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's another.
And
So there have been many magazines.
yeah.
Fantastic. Yes. Khyati, please carry on.
Yes. Before 1960, it was like some magazines, they are actually publishing science fictions. Despite Ghanada's attempt, actually, Premendra Mitra wrote many science fictions which are not tall tales, which are actually science fiction.
Tolstoy. Yes.
Yeah. Which are very good science fiction actually, like Pipre Puran. Yeah. Patale Dosh Bochor or something. And there are lots of other stories also. There is actually, from Day's publication, there is an anthology of science fiction stories by Premendra Mitra. So those are very good science fiction stories, not tall tale, actual science fictions. Again, what I am saying that after 1960, there come Adish Bardhan. Adish Bardhan, that time he was a very young man, and he thought that maybe they can start a science fiction magazine in India. Like that time, it was science fiction was in India. It was very, very translation based, because Hemendra Kumar Rai translated a lot of science fiction and Indianized it in his kind of charm.
So
it was very good, but he was actually Indianized all those science fictions.
Not an original work.
I mean, Hemendra Kumar Ray, he also wrote, proper science fiction stories. I remember something called the Martian Invasion or something.
There was
Agaman something.
Yeah, Meghdut and Motte Agaman.
Yes, that's the one.
Yes. Yeah, but those are kind of an adventure story, not very much science fiction story. But of course, there are science fictions also. And anyway, but what Adish Bardhan did, he actually went to Satyajit Ray, he went to Premendra Mitra, and he said that I am going to start a science fiction magazine in Bengali. And you guys actually wrote science fiction. You are very famous in that field, so you back me up.
It's like the boys group. Come on.
Yeah. So all of them, they started the magazine Ashcharya. And it was 1963. It was a huge hit at that time. They actually built a very good group of authors. And those guys keep writing science fiction. They keep translating science fiction. And it was very popular at that time. And not only in writing science fiction, they actually started reading science fiction in All India Radio also.
Yes.
That was also.
And
if the magazines looked anywhere like this, no wonder everybody will just rush to read it, just based on the covers.
So the credit goes to the man who designed the cover. It's really good.
I mean, sometimes you do judge the book by its cover, and it's so nice and pulpy. I'd buy it for the covers alone.
Right.
And there were great editors, Sujit Dhar, Ronen Ghosh.
They came later, actually. At this time, actually, only Adish Bardhan was the only editor.
That's fantastic. Yes.
Ashcharya. So in 1964, they started making a shared world of science fiction story. I think that was one of the first work of shared world science fictions. Like Sobuj Manush. It was called Sobuj Manush, the Green Man. So the idea was some of those guys like Adish Bardhan, Premendra Mitra, Dilip Rai Chaudhary. Dilip Rai Chaudhary was one of the pioneers. He has written wonderful science fiction. He was a scientist by profession. It's very unfortunate that he died very young age. Otherwise, I would say that he would surpass all of them, maybe. Because in very short time, he wrote very seminal science fiction because his background was pure science.
So there is a huge debate. Scientists writing science fiction, people from literature editing science fiction. There's a huge debate. We can have blood.
So what happened that they wrote a story, actually 4 stories in a shared world, where green men invaded Earth and they are trying to overthrow the human government and human way of life. They are going to overthrow it. So 4 of them wrote 4 stories and without consulting anyone, and they went to All India Radio and read that story on air.
Just like H.G. War of the Worlds.
It was almost like War of the Worlds that Orson Welles stories telling. Like it was very famous. It went there. Later they actually wrote it as a radio drama, and it was also available in that radio drama is also available in YouTube right now. But what happened that original storytelling, that 4 of them, they actually read their own stories in their own voice. That was lost. That was lost until we found, like 2 years back, we found one of the tapes, that those round kind of tapes. We found one of that hidden inside a trunk in late Adrish Bardhan's house under a bed. It was there like for 30-40 years. It was there. Even when we asked Adrish Bardhan, he said that I lost the tape. It was gone. So
it was one of a kind.
Yeah, but it was there. We found it and we restored that tape, and then we actually published an anthology on that book, then on Green Men from Kalpabiswa.
So it has been translated into English. I just wanted to ask.
No, it wasn't translated in English, but we are still in process that is going to be translated in English. I hope very soon.
Looking forward to that.
Maybe it was delayed because of this COVID situation. Otherwise, I would say that it would be out.
I'm waiting for those translations to come for sure, because I read the synopsis of those stories in that scroll article. I was like, I have to read these stories.
Those are very short stories, and it's an open ending. You love it.
Yeah. I mean, first time shared universe, such, great men writing, sharing the same world and populating.
India,
I mean, seriously, I mean, I think we all of us owe a lot of debt to Deep and his team at Kalpabiswa,
That's a very good work.
Digging up these tapes, or doing all that research and to just figure out which year was Shukra Brahman written, and
they are science fiction detectives going to the house and the chest and finding out the treasures and all those things.
Actually, the whole thing, what we have found that our science fiction has a very rich heritage, but there was very little written history about Bengali or Indian science fiction that I could find.
Very little. When I was doing my research, there was hardly any article except Bodhisattva, and there was Debraj Sengupta, I guess. John Clute, the guy who
even that Debraj Sengupta's article, that Sharal Babu's friend, right?
Yes.
That was very erroneous. Lots of errors are there.
Full of errors are there.
I completely agree that I read those 2 research papers and stuff like that, and then there it was said that Jagadananda Ray had written Shukra Brahman in 1857. I was like, my God. I mean, he's actually written a science fiction story about a voyage to Venus or voyage in Venus in the year of the First World War of Independence. But then, turned out he was born only in the 1860s. So, he was conceived, he's written one science fiction story. I mean, it doesn't get more science fictional than that.
Yes. Too much of science fiction.
Yes.
And I guess if there was Kalpabiswa, my research would have been very easier. Because most of the texts are in Bengali and lack of, whether the bibliography citation, they are correct or something like that. And I was like, the Kuntalin tail, I need the Kuntalin tail on my hair. So it was very essential. And then I remembered Shonku. He's almost bald. Maybe he was suffering from lack of, fund or something, like lack of research or something like that. So yes.
Professor Shonku actually has invented some hair oil which regrows hair.
Yes. No, but he was a bald guy, man.
Yeah,
He was a bald guy.
himself is bald guy.
I don't know who he used it on or whatever. He's got like 100 inventions.
Yeah.
And the inventions are very eco-friendly. So I had this curiosity, and I read one of my friend's blog or something like that. So the Indian scientist, my elder brother is a researcher from pure science, unlike me, I'm a literature person. So the main problem in India is the research fund. Kahan se aata hai? And then the government grants and all those things. And he used to get grant and everything. And he was like a true Indian, means he was a rich kid, of course. His father was a doctor of Giridih, means Bihar or something like that. But he used to go to Europe only when he would get the fund or something like that. That was typical Indian mentality of the professors. UGC से reimbursement मिलेगा तो ही बाहर जाएंगे, नहीं तो बाहर नहीं जाएंगे. So that was very realistic of Satyajit Ray to portray Shonku in that light or something like that. So yes, and one of the good thing of Shonku is that you come across Ghanasham Dash or Natbol to Chakro, and there's another hero, something like that. Shonku is something, he's above caste. So Indian Hindu society is a casteist or something like that. So he's above caste. Trilokeshwar Shonku, you can't come across some name. And Trilokeshwar means Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwar. He is above everything. He's above the God, and he's the Trinity and everything. So Satyajit Ray was very clear with his nomenclature and sage mode activated. That's it. He was almost a sage. So he never used to drink. He never used to smoke, unlike Feluda, one of his heroes, unlike Professor Challenger. And there was hardly any, female characters or something like that, with due respect to all the females or something like that. So he was like he was a sage. He used to.
He was a sage. Yeah.
He's the old monk. He's the old monk. Basically, he's the old monk.
The 7:15 mark. I mean, we wanted to talk a bit about also the whole Ray alien saga, which is fascinating.
So I guess Satyajit Ray wrote this beautiful science fiction story. Apart from Shonku, he wrote many science fiction stories. One is Bonku Babur Bondhu, means friend of Bonku Babu.
Yeah.
And prior to Bonku Babur Bondhu, if you see all the the Mars attack and all those films, aliens are very hostile. They are coming up like, this land belongs to us, bazooka, and they fire the bazooka and they end and every city demolishes or something like that. Here he comes up with an alien who is very friendly. He's like, the Koi Mil Gaya guy, Jadoo. So so this Bonku Babur Bondhu was later developed into a script known as The Alien. And The Alien was supposed to be adapted in Hollywood, I guess. Everyone knows the story. And I don't know what happened between the first world and the third world. Yeah. I don't know what happened.
Mike Wilson basically gave him a raw deal, copyrighted it in his own name, right? And then the whole, Peter Sellers, as we say, Cave Kai, left him very sort of bitter. And, and then as he himself says, the mimeographed copies were floating around Hollywood, and it reached the hand of a certain Mr. Steven Spielberg, who made Alien. And then the story goes that because it was Arthur C. Clarke, so Ray and Clarke had met in London. And then it was Clarke who actually told Mike Wilson about Satyajit Ray writing this story. And then Mike Wilson invited himself to Ray's home and all of that. He sort of felt responsible, and he actually he's supposed to have called up Satyajit Ray saying, hey, this has happened, why don't you do something? And Satyajit Ray replies, we artists have better things to do. I moved on.
Moved on. So that's it. So
my favorite part of that story is where Satyajit Ray gets the letter saying, Ravana, you keep Sita.
Yeah. No, that's because that's much later, after Mike Wilson became one Swami and all of that, and he's like, dear Ravana, keep Sita. I mean, it's fun. Even that whole McGonagall release, I put the saga in the chat, and you can just read up about it. Now, coming to
actually, when we talk about that Satyajit Ray's film, that we should also mention that Cine Club. the Science Fiction Cine Club. Yeah.
Cine Club.
I don't know whether you have heard about it, Gautam, because it was also one of the that product brainchild of Adhish Badhan, Satyajit Ray and Premendra Mitra. They started a science fiction cine club in 1960s in Calcutta. Yeah, again, it was a phenomenal.
Just imagine 1960s Cine Club.
So
they were ahead of time.
They actually used to go write letters to different embassy and ask them to send their science fiction movies to send in Calcutta. And Adhish Badhan used to go and post those responses, and then they get that the scans of movies, science fiction movies. Those are coming through the different channels, and they start showing those in some of those cinema halls in Calcutta. And it went on like 2 or 3 years at that time. I think it's from 64 or 65 to 3 years. And people were actually very, very interested in Science Fiction Cine Club. Like all those, we have some photos. We actually recovered some photos of that time. And all that time's called Calcutta's Who's Who, all of them are present in those movie sessions. And Satyajit Ray was the one who actually started saying like, yeah, now sound, music, and that movie starts. Those kind of thing happened.
And basically,
so just come from the past to the present. I mean, of course, there's Kalpabiswa that we all know about. Then what's the current contemporary landscape, right? Who the authors we need to look out for? Who are the magazines? Are there any translations available? And what does it look for? Going ahead. Deep, if you can just.
Actually, in 2015 we started Kalpabiswa. Before that, there was not much happening. Last science fiction magazine was Fantastic by Adhish Badhan and Ghosh, and it died like in 90s. Still, some issues went on. They keep republishing some old issues till 2000, and then everything died up. Like in Bengali, science fiction almost died down at that time because nobody was actually writing anything or publishing anything. Only science fiction was published in some Bengali children periodicals, and those things are not really something new or contemporary or anything. Those are like rehashed version of 70s or 80s stories. Only 2 or 3 people I would say that keep writing science fiction that time. One is maybe Abhigyan Rai Chaudhuri, and second one is Anish Dev. Anish Dev was one of the main disciples of Adhish Badhan. He was a very, very influential writer in Bengali right now, and he wrote lots of science fiction and mostly genre fictions. So those 2 guys keep writing science fiction only. And in 2015, actually, what we found that there is nothing else. There is nothing much to read. Like if I want to read science fiction in English, I have so much choice. But in Bengali, I can't find that anyone is writing science fiction. I can't find anyone is reading science fiction, good science fiction, mature science fiction. So we thought about doing some new magazine, and some of us actually told us that, okay, make a web magazine, because nobody is going to read a science fiction magazine or circulate a science fiction magazine. It's a too laborious job to publish a science fiction printed magazine and then circulate it throughout the market. So why not make a web magazine? It will be much easier, and we can actually find some time to write and read good science fiction instead of going out and selling magazine. So we start Kalpabiswa, and our aim was to write contemporary matured science fiction, not children's tale. That was what we actually decided from the beginning. We are not going to write children's science fiction because that was what people are reading and writing for the last few decades in Bengal. So we need to move out from there, and we need to say to other people that you have to write something which is matured, which is contemporary. So we actually started using some theme for every issue, and we gave out that theme, and we said to all the writers that you have to write on that theme. That's a contemporary theme, you have to write on it. So it was kind of a very strict in our editorial when we were keeping it very strict.
So it was a scientific approach in creating science fiction.
Yeah, because otherwise people doesn't take science fiction much seriously. So we use lots of
There is, I guess,
translation also.
Frankenstein 100. There is this collection, I guess.
No, which is why I said, that whole over analysis, there are different kinds of science fiction. There is science-based science fiction. There is science-dependent fiction. Then there is rahasya and vigyan, which is one more kind. Right?
You
guys have over-analyzed it too. Okay. Just to.
Do you want to say, Shinoy, do you want to say we are killing the fun?
Huh?
Are we killing the fun by over-analyzing this particular thing?
No, analysis has its own place.
That's part of the fun.
It's part of the fun, right? Sometimes it's fun to just analyze that.
Thank God.
Right. Okay. Vijay, we'll just go to some audience questions.
Yeah, I was thinking it's about time now.
A couple. See, there are a couple of this is to you, Deep and Debraj, two very common sort of this thing. So TK's writer on YouTube asks, Sultana's Dream is a fascinating instance of utopian writing in the feminist vein with detailed word building. Did this initiate a genre of utopian writing, if not SF in Bangla, or was it a one-off? And then Tarun asks on chat, who are the contemporary women authors writing SF in Bengal? Is there any lineage of utopian writing that can be traced to Rokeya Hossain?
Not really. We actually in Kalpabiswa, we published an issue on only Bengali women writers. Bengali women writers write science fiction. And we actually named it Konkavati Kalpabigyan Lekheni. Konkavati didn't write Kalpabigyan. We named it. Okay. Konkavati was actually the backstory. That was a fantasy character by Toilokanath. It was very famous fantasy character in Bengali, Kankavati. So we named it for Kankavati Kalpabigyan Lekheni. And all of that issue, it was almost 30, we have published 30 stories, science fiction and fantasy stories by Bengali authors, and all of them are women. And what I find that almost maybe 60 or 70% stories were actually not utopian, dystopian stories.
Oh my God.
And yeah, those stories.
They're seeing the reality, basically.
Yeah.
They're seeing the reality.
So people are much different in their thinking pattern than secular Sultana's Dreams time. Things have changed. So on those stories, mainly that
maybe during
people
Sultana's Dreams,
women are there feeling that they're helpless. That feeling actually came out very, very prominently. That how helpless they are in our society.
Which month or which year issue was this? Because there's someone called Anushri says, her research through zero names of Bangla women contemporary writers.
Actually, there are not much contemporary writers who write science fiction or fantasy regularly, but you can look for Jashodhara Rai Chaudhuri. Jashodhara Rai Chaudhuri is actually daughter of Dr. Dilip Rai Chaudhuri, that original writer of Ashtarya era. And there is Leela Majumdar. Leela Majumdar is also aunt of
related to Satyajit Ray.
Yeah, she wrote wonderful science fictions, and there are some science fiction written by Bani Basu. There is a science fiction.
Bani Basu, I guess, is the mother of Samit Basu. I guess. Yeah. Am I correct? Yeah.
I am not sure.
I'm not sure. I guess.
And then in English, I know for sure that Sukanya Datta writes a lot of science fiction.
Yeah, lots of science fiction. Yes.
Yeah, but
Samit
she, of
Basu
course, she
writes,
writes in
yeah,
English. She
Sukanya
writes in
Datta.
English.
And
then
even there
Rimi
is, I
Chatterjee
guess,
is also
Amita
there,
Ghosh who wrote
again in
Calcutta
English.
She also wrote in English. Yeah.
So there are few, yeah.
There's
So
one
there
more
are few Bengalis who are
question.
writing in English.
Yes.
I mean, if you go to Bengalis writing
Okay.
in English, of Bengalis writing in English, which is another, hour's discussion.
Yeah.
I guess someone was asking
there's
about
one more.
Shishendu, I guess. Shishendu Mukhopadhyay.
Yes, but we have to, but then, we'll probably need another session for that.
Yeah.
So,
There's
Vijay, there was another question
from YouTube. Yeah, there's another question from YouTube by Ishwar. He asks, out of curiosity, Buddhist canon speaks of other worlds populated by sentient beings. I was wondering if the inspiration for Bengali science fiction came from the long Buddhist rule by the Pala dynasty.
That's an interesting question.
It is. It's a very interesting question.
I'm not sure because there are lots of those science fiction where some otherworldly people or other worlds came in our world. Those are actually mostly coming from translation from English or different literatures, like
European literature.
European literature. Yeah, I mean those kind of stories were heavily influenced from Western literature. So I'm not sure whether it's coming from Buddhist literature.
It's an interesting question. There's something to think about.
Yeah.
So Hashfire has written Ray Dynasty. This guy is great. Okay.
No, obviously it's a Ray dynasty. I mean, and I wish we could spend more time on the whole Ray alien story, but we put that in, which is why when people Debraj, you mentioned Koi Mil Gaya, and when people say that oh, it's a ripoff of Spielberg's E.T.
And E.T. is from
Rakesh Roshan just ripping. I say no. This is Rakesh Roshan taking revenge, on behalf of India for ripping off Satyajit Ray. Right? I guess we should,
from the heaven. I don't know how. That's really magical words you have said, man. Really jaduish. Loved it.
Come on. Okay. Pandit Ji.
I think there's another comment somewhere in between about Adrish Vardhan being investigated for his nom de plume.
Yeah.
Did that actually happen?
Pardon?
I've heard about this.
There was a comment in between about Adrish Vardhan being investigated for his pen name. Basically, did that happen, or is this just a urban legend?
Investigated for
his pen name.
Pseudonym.
Oh yeah, that actually happened. He was at the beginning. He was actually using a pen name to as an editor of Ashcharya.
Okay.
He was using some pen name as Akash Sen. That's because that time they didn't have much writer to write science fiction in that magazine. So he used Akash Sen as an editor name, and he used to write stories as Adrish Vardhan. So what happened that he was called in Lal Bazar, and the police officer actually told him that who is Akash Sen, and he said, I am the Akash Sen. So he said that you can't do it. So, and after that he said that I read also science fiction. This is a very good magazine you are doing. So keep doing it, but do it on your own name. Don't do it.
You could have written about the politics of that particular era.
Yeah.
Cool. That's really
Deep, Tarun is asking, what is the issue and month of the special issue on women authors, the Kalpabiswa issue that you're talking about?
Just give me a second. I'll share the link.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
He's ready.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Akash Sen, fascinating story, but I would love to hear the author, editor, conversation between Akash Sen, the editor, and Adish Bardhan, the writer. Absolutely fabulous to watch.
That was really nice. Cool.
Yeah, I guess that's the last question that we would take because we are at time.
Yeah. So,
I mean, of course, Tarun, Deep has put the Kalpabiswa issue here. I'll just put this out on the YouTube channel as well.
Cool.
213, how appropriate.
Women writers issues. Oh, cool. Women.
Correct, issue 13. I mean, that's just
For
a
Halloween. I mean, it's really
coincidence.
appropriate.
Just a coincidence.
Well played.
All right, I think that's all we have for today. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you everyone who attended today. And if you all have any suggestions for what topics we can discuss further on Anthill Inside, please do reach out to us and let us know. Thank you, Deep and Debraj, for joining us today and sharing all your expertise with us. I mean, you all are really passionate about this. That's really obvious. It was lovely listening to you. Thank you, Benoy, for shepherding this whole thing so wonderfully.
Thank you, and it's always a pleasure to talk about science fiction, and you know this especially at Bengali Science, you can take each author and talk for an hour. Like I said, analyzing and deconstructing the whole thing, or even if you take stages or magazines, and like we said, if you go to the science fiction from Bangladesh, both in Bengali and English, that's another topic. And I think we've not seen the end of this discussion, and so I'd like to thank you Vijaya, thank you to Zainab and to Hasgeek and Anthill Inside
and David and everyone for the behind the scenes.
And
thank you,
Debraj, and most of all to a very engaged audience, a very engaged audience.
That was really good.
The audience,
a learned audience. That's very good. Yep.
Right.
Very much. I mean, more learned than me at least. So I'm going to take all these notes back and just dive back into it.
Yes, literally,
all I can do is use my Google Translate.
Good, you are the encyclopedia, so don't worry.
All right. And today I believe is Lakshmi Puja.
Yes.
Lakshmi Puja.
So enjoy the puja, and yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.